Hello and welcome back to China Manufacturing Decoded from Sofeast. Adrian here, and Renaud's back with me for this episode. Hello, Renaud.
Hey Adrian, yeah. How you doing?
I'm well. It's certainly not very warm where I am, and the UK is currently on strike. Everything's going crazy here. But any listeners internationally, just go check out the UK news. You'll see what's going on in the UK. It's
Not much
it's been a
better.
bit of a mess.
Not much better in France, but yeah, fortunately I'm far away.
Yes, you're in a much better environment, I think.
Yes, much better. Yeah, on the way back from North America, and a few days in Japan. So enjoying
Excellent.
the orderly society and so on.
Can't say I'm not jealous, but there you go. So you're now heading back towards Asia, and this is probably something that a lot of our listeners are thinking of doing as well, especially now that China has reopened. One of the things that people will be thinking of doing, some of our listeners for sure, is sourcing new suppliers in Asia, especially for electronic products, which is a niche that we work with a lot of the time in Sofeast. And one of the key kinds of suppliers that one might be sourcing is a contract manufacturer for electronic products. So what I wanted to talk about today was how you go about finding, sourcing a contract manufacturer and choosing the right one for your needs if you are going to get an electronic product made, especially in China.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, first we should clarify what is a CM, a contract manufacturer, right?
Yeah.
So when companies search for suppliers in Alibaba and so on, they see OEM, ODM, blah, blah, blah. There's a whole alphabet soup. And basically ODM means that ODM, original design manufacturer, it would mean that they own the intellectual property, or in many cases in China, it's something derived from their work for their other customers, but they present it as their own IP, and then you can buy the product and you distribute it, right? And that's ODM. And in that case, you are basically a distributor, and your supplier owns the product, right? Product intellectual property rights. And obviously there are some variations on that where you might pick one of their models and ask them to add a special feature or remove something, and maybe do the casing a bit differently so that aesthetically it's a bit different and so on. But still, most of the IP belongs to the supplier. OEM means that you come with your own product that you design, or you want to design it together with them. And again, in the Chinese environment, it's not so clear by default who owns the IP. If you don't take any precautions, it will be owned by the manufacturer. But if you have a good contract, you can cover that. However, in many cases, OEM suppliers, again, if you don't pay much attention and you don't write black on white exactly what is required from each party and so on, they might maybe make sure that you cannot pull the tooling. For example, if you pay for custom tooling, you cannot easily switch production from one factory to the other if they don't perform up to your standards, or if for whatever reason you want to change to move production away, right? So they usually want to have certain rights, let's say, over the product. Let's keep it simple like this. And if for companies that want to avoid that, then they try to work with a contract manufacturer, and a contract manufacturer basically is much more comfortable with having everything laid out in a contract. Usually they have their own, development agreement and manufacturing agreement templates, and they're perfectly fine not owning the product or anything. And they're fine if you, at one point, you want to transfer production away, right? I mean, except if you negotiated something different, but it is really the way a lot of big companies work. They tend to work with contract manufacturers, not OEM or ODM, because they want to have control. They want to have control over the product, right? So that's that just for a short definition, right? And then also in the electronics industry, you might see sometimes EMS, right? Electronic manufacturing services. You might think, what is that? Usually is a company that does the PCBA process, right? Assembles the PCBA, the components on the PCB, and sometimes they also do assembly operations. But be careful, if they introduce themselves as a EMS supplier, it means their main focus is on PCBA. And if your product's assembly and final testing and so on is a little bit complicated, if there are, let's say, there's a lot of mechanical engineering design involved, they are probably not the best fit, right? Whereas contract manufacturers usually definitely, have a focus on assembly and testing, and they might also do some of the upstream processes such as SMT for PCBA and injection molding and maybe CNC machining and so on. They might have some of that in-house, but they usually they will make the full product. So assembly and testing is quite important. So that was for the initial clarification, right? But the question was what to look at if you're looking for a contract manufacturer, if you want to select one, right?
Yes.
So the first question actually is, what kind of quantity are you planning to order? So everybody always talks about Apple and Foxconn, and like Foxconn has 500,000 people in China, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Yeah, well, because Apple's volumes and their other customers' volumes are enormous, right? And this is what people very often would call a tier one supplier. The Foxconn, the Wistron, the Pegatron, these large Taiwanese manufacturers, and there's also some, Luxshare and a few others that are Chinese owned, and there's some others, but it's mostly these two countries, let's say. And then you have like tier 2, tier 3, people often talk about these kinds of tiers. If you're developing a product and you want your first batch to be 1,000 pieces, and if you're planning maybe, if everything goes well, next year we'll make 20,000 pieces, you're not going for the biggest ones. You don't go for the big boys. Forget about it, right? So that is really, really very, very important. You need to be interesting to a supplier of the right size. And it's the same for ODM and OEM suppliers, right? This is a bit basic, but you need them to be interested in the business and to spend the time and the engineering resources and so on to do what is needed. Okay, to review your design and do risk analysis and carry it through an NPI process at the beginning, and so on and so forth. Whereas if you're way too small, well, you might have 5 hours a week from a project manager, or maybe more from someone that just hired who is not very experienced, right? That's an example. And conversely, if your orders are pretty large, don't go for a small company that barely has the capacity, to take on maybe the complexity of your product during the transfer to manufacturing phase and preparation and all of that, but also the capacity just to manufacture it in the right volumes, because then for sure it's going to be subcontracted. They might not tell you. I mean, you don't want to go into that, right? So that's the first point. Second point, is it high volume, low mix or low volume, high mix, right? What exactly are you going to order? Are you going to order just one SKU, one type of product in one color, one size, and that's it? Okay, that's one thing that's more interesting. But if you start to say, well, there's going to be like a small, a medium, and a large, they're going to go in 5 different colors and so on, suddenly it's not that interesting to the same kind of company. Okay. Suddenly they will see it actually as 3 different products. And they're going to say, well, the quantity per product is not very high, right? And it's not just about internally, do they have the resources to put on this? Are they interested, compared to their other projects? But it's also their core suppliers, because they have a few preferred suppliers for plastic parts, for metal parts, for casting, for this and that, for PCBA. And maybe the volume is not going to be very interesting to them. Or just the extra complexity with how many SKUs you have, it's not going to be very interesting to them. It's the same idea as size, right? So you got to be careful here. You got to be careful. A lot of factories just want to optimize for making one big batch and not having much confusion and not having to do a lot of preparation, let's say. They do the preparation for one order, and then that line is going to keep running for 3 weeks, right? So versus some other places where things are much more flexible, they have process engineers and they have a certain process to make their lines more flexible, let's say, right? And the line leaders have sort of their checklist and are used to it, and they switch from this one to that one, and they make sure that there's no material from the previous one still on the line, and they have to make sure that all the work instructions have to change and so on and so forth. That's in assembly, but actually it's the same with the component and material suppliers, right? If you buy custom-made parts, same problem. If the quantity is low, it's not going to be interesting to the same component supplier. So that was point number 2. Point number 3 is about visibility and transparency. Okay, so a lot of buyers, when they start to work in Asia, they say, well, I don't really know how this works. I just need someone like that I can trust, and we've been doing that a number of times, and I just piggyback on their experience. I don't want to really learn everything. I don't have the time for that. It's too complicated. I don't have the capability for, of following everything. And then that's what some trading companies love. That's what some manufacturers love. Okay, don't worry, we'll just provide you a full solution, and that's it. You just get your product, you pay for it, you get the product, that's it. But a lot of issues can come from that. Let's say there's a problem with there's some reliability problems, and it seems like they're always related to the same components. All right. Well, then you say, what's going on with that component? And maybe you say, hey, I'm going to be in wherever. I'm going to be in Suzhou, and where maybe assembly is taking place next week. I'd like to go and visit the manufacturer of that component. And then your supplier says, well, it's a bit more complicated, blah, blah, blah. They don't really want to see you. Don't worry about that. We're on top of it. And basically, they don't want you to know where it's made. And it comes back to what I was mentioning before, is that if you as the buyer have too much information, if you know everything, then it's easy for you it's relatively easy, let's say. It's easier to switch to another supplier. Let's say that there's 4 different custom components and there's 20 standard components. If you know exactly where all of these are made or purchased, well, then maybe the assembly supplier is quite, disposable. You can switch to another one. You can have a backup. You can start to switch between, orders between your maybe 2 different assembly suppliers and so on. And so some suppliers do not like that at all. And that makes sense. Let's say if you as the buyer did not pay for the sourcing service. that is really because maybe they spent tens and tens of hours working on finding these suppliers and qualifying them and everything, and then suddenly you ask them to give you the information for free. Well, not going to happen easily, right? So you have to be clear from the beginning. If from your past experiences or from the excellent advice that companies like ours provide, you know that you need some visibility over the bill of materials, the list of components and their sources and things like that. You got to specify that from the very beginning, and you get to tell the supplier about it. You got to make sure it's in the contract, and then you need to avoid the suppliers that are hesitant, because if they're already hesitant now, they're going to be even more hesitant once they see that you've already spent a lot of time, finishing the development of the product with them and investing in tooling that they have in their warehouse and things like that, right? So pick the right supplier so that you have the level of transparency that you need. And a lot of people say, well, it's not possible for relatively low volume to have the transparency over the bill of material. Well, that is not true. That is not true. If you're in this situation, contact us. That is very, very untrue. Okay. So that was point 3, visibility, transparency, or the bill of materials.
When it comes to transparency over the supply chain, I think there's more demands on importers these days than before, certainly in the West, right? But I don't know whether the demands for you to provide that level of transparency over your supply chain, whether your orders are large or small, I don't know whether that the demands are moving faster than the Asian suppliers are in terms of their evolving to be able to provide the transparency.
Right. Yeah. So especially with EU and their big initiative, what they call the Green Deal, the upcoming eco-design regulation, and for companies that are on the stock market, even if they're not large, the corporate directive, corporate reporting directive, there's things like that are coming up and that are forcing companies to do more due diligence in their supply chain and to provide more information about the product, but also about the manufacturing place and so on to consumers, because it's always related. The product comes out of a factory, just to be compliant. You have to conduct a certain amount of due diligence on the manufacturer anyway, right? So all of that is together forms the basis for compliance in the EU, among other things, right? And it's just the EU, but then looking at UK is following that pretty much. Australia, Canada, probably going to follow to a certain extent in their own ways. California might do things also. So let's see. But this is a mega trend. The regulators are asking for more information, more assurance that the right amount of due diligence has been conducted. Yes. So let's go to point 4 is about intellectual property. So, and again, I mentioned this at the beginning, the whole point about working with a contract manufacturer is that they don't try to have any claims over your intellectual property, right? Well, make sure that you get it confirmed, right? And obviously, an American-owned or European-owned contract manufacturer will have their own view on that, their own approach to that, which might be a little bit different from a Chinese-owned contract manufacturer. There are always cultural differences and things like that, but this is relatively basic, right? it's got to be covered in the product development agreement anyway. But just always, again, make sure that it's very clear and that their business model is not to become an ODM over time, right? And to sort of grab their customers' products and, and start to resell them on other markets and so on. This is not so good, right? Or just make a few cosmetic changes, but reuse some of the internal parts and the firmware and the main functions and so on. And they might in the end be your competitor. This is no good, right? Point number 5 is, do you need help with product development? And do you need help with also compliance? So do you need help with product development? Very often, companies that have an idea for a new product and want to get it manufactured, very often they will do some of the work, right? Maybe they get to a proof of concept. Maybe they go further. Maybe they do all of the firmware because they really want to have that in their hands, and they select the key electronic components. But maybe for the mechanical side, they do a very sort of gross, simple design, 3D printed, just to make sure that overall it kind of feels okay. But they don't want to spend much, too much time on that. Well, in that case, they work with the manufacturer to finish the product development work, right? And to make sure it's designed for proper manufacturing and assembly and for quality and so on and so forth, right? And that's fine, but you got to work with a manufacturer that, number one, has the engineering capability and the resources available and so on, and number two, that, it's just not too busy. And again, it comes back to points 1 and 2. That is a good fit for you, and you are a good fit for them, so that they are interested, right? So that's really important. When it comes to compliance, again, do you need them to already be aware of what actually applies to your product? And we're talking about electronic products. So, in the US, FCC, obviously, UL, for some products, in the EU, anyway, ROS, and maybe LVD, maybe RED, which includes some others. There's a number of things that apply, right? And then if it's also Australia, also Japan, also it gets a bit complicated, right? So do they actually know about that? Are they aware of how to handle that? What is their experience, right? And if you need the contract manufacturer to be aware of all that and to help you, okay, you got to make sure that you work with the right people here again. And you will need to work with more sophisticated people, right? So, and it might come at a higher cost, maybe, right? So you need to balance the pros and cons here, and what is really important for you. Point 6 is about the manufacturing, the fabrication processes they have in-house. Okay, there's a lot of people who have this idea that, hey, I want to work with the manufacturer and they do like everything in-house. I want them to make the plastic parts in-house and the metal parts and to, and this and this and that and the silicone and whatever. For most products, it just doesn't really make sense. It's going to be a bunch of standard products that they're going to buy, but you don't want them to try to make the screws. It just doesn't make any sense, right? So that's one thing. And the second thing is the benefit of having them make things in-house to a higher extent, let's say, is twofold. Number one is control. And yes, if they make it in-house, they can have better control. If it's a high level, a very good factory with very mature systems, it will come out on average, of a high quality and consistently good quality, that's for sure. The second point is if they are very specialized, they only make a certain kind of product. Okay, so for example, the car factories, right? They might make their own engine. Now more and more the engine anyway, the combustion engines maybe tended to be made by in maybe a separate plant. Okay, but then they would get the steel coils, and then they would unroll, they would stamp, they would weld, they would paint, and then they would put all the fittings inside. I mean, some of that is done in house because it's sort of like, every car has to go through these things, right? And if it's a I don't know, like for example, I remember a wheelchair factory. Well, same thing, and some wheelchair factories make a lot of their own parts. The rubber and the metal parts. Maybe they cut and they make all kinds of things. So one of them was even doing some stitching for the textile parts. I mean, you can do that if you always make wheelchairs, right? And it's always the same kinds of wheelchairs if possible. Okay. If your product is relatively new, doesn't fit into this kind of very repetitive sort of product where you can work with a very specialized factory, it doesn't really make sense. Okay, so think about all this. Don't come in with preconceived notions about what a factory is supposed to look like and how they're supposed to be organized. Go in there with your eyes open. The good thing is that right now, China is opening. Things are a bit delayed. It's not that easy to get the visa reactivated or granted. There's a long waiting time. Also, there's not that many flights and they're expensive. I mean, it's not great, right? But what I'm saying is, in a few months, anyway, the situation will probably be clear. You can go and you can visit and you can ask questions, right? Again, don't go with preconceived notions. Point 7 is quality control, including the testing equipment. So do they have a testing lab? What do they do in there? Is it in good conditions? Do the people really use it? And ask questions, also if you can visit, about their quality system and what kind of preventive actions they take, not just inspection, right? Don't just look at inspection. Try to see if it's a mature system. And it's not that difficult, you can simply book a factory audit and we can help with that. And there's very common sort of checklists out there. It's not difficult to have an idea about that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Point number 8 is the tooling, the jigs, the fixtures, and so on. Okay. So we're talking about electronics in particular. So for example, when they buy the PCBA, who's going to make the function testing stations, right? PCBA supplier or the contract manufacturer? Who's going to do it? What about the assembly fixtures, the go-no-go gauges and things like that? Do they have the capability to at least plan for it in-house? Now, if they have a much smaller company actually make the jigs and so on, that's fine. But do they have some engineers, some process engineers to think about it, and quality engineers and so on, right? Can they show some examples, right? This is very highly correlated with good manufacturers. Number 9 is liability. So if the product is not well made and there's manufacturing defects and it leads to safety issues or just non-compliance and it's very expensive for your company, what's going to happen, right? Can you go against them? Does do they accept to have a contract with a liability that extends past what is kind of, standard in most Chinese OEM, ODM contracts, where they would just say, well, we can give you a rebate for next time, blah, blah, blah. You can send back and rework, and that's it, nothing else, right? But if it costs you a lot of money and 20% of the products are defective, there should be some kind of escalation, right? And always keep in mind, if it's design issues, design defects on your product, don't go after your manufacturer. This is actually your problem, right? Okay. Point number 10 is the payment terms. Again, the sort of standard in China is a 30% payment before production, and then 70% either just before shipment or after shipment, but before sending the original documents, the bill of lading and so on, for sea shipment anyway. Is this what you want to go for? Do you want over time to have better payment terms? Well, you might have to talk to a number of contract manufacturers here, and you might have to have ways to reassure them. Okay, if you're just a startup, just starting, no track record or anything, and no particular story to tell, obviously it's going to be harder to sell your project. Okay, it's always like that anyway. And then the last one is the delivery terms, and what incoterms specifically to work with. By default, if you don't know a Chinese supplier, if it's shipped by sea, you would usually go with FOB terms. That's what most companies do. And the big benefit of FOB is that they take care of everything local in their country, and they do the export processing. Okay, they prepare all of that, they export out of China. You don't have to deal with China paperwork at all. And then you nominate the freight forwarder that manages the shipping, and they deliver to the freight forwarder, and you know when the goods are in the possession of your freight forwarder, when the goods are on the boat, and so on. You have visibility over all of that. And for example, if you want a final quality inspection before shipment, if they want to ship the goods out before, sort of pull a fast one on you up quick, and sorry, already shipped out. Well, your freight forwarder has not issued the shipping order yet, so there's no way that the goods would be transferred like that. Okay. However, if they manage the shipment, it's so easy for them, and you have no visibility. The products might still be in the factory, but you don't know. If they say it's already in a warehouse, by the boat, going to be loaded in 2 hours, you have no way of knowing, right? So that's why most of the time it would be FOB. Now, if you work with a contract manufacturer that can be trusted, you can let them handle more. Again, if it's one of like capabilities in their teams, they have someone who's really good at organizing shipments. Why not let them ship DDU or DDP, delivered duty unpaid or delivered duty paid, all the way, door to door. It's why not, right? Now, try to avoid CIF. I think we mentioned that before. CIF is sort of is very regular Incoterm, but do not do that if you are not sure what your local fees will be, because that's how the supplier can get a lower quote and basically push some costs over to you, and you only know about that at the last minute. So try to avoid CIF because that's really a very serious risk. And basically that's it. Does
Well,
that make
basically,
sense?
there's lots to unpack there. Actually, that's
Yes.
11 points.
Right.
So if I just quickly summarize, then so we started off by just talking about the different types of suppliers and highlighting what a contract manufacturer actually is, the sort of things that they would be doing. I mean, we're specifically talking about selecting a contract manufacturer for electronic products in China, but I suppose a lot of the advice that you've given are common for non-electronic products as well, other hard goods perhaps, and also other countries outside
Yes.
of China.
To a certain extent, yeah.
Yeah.
Hot goods, yeah. Mechanical products without electronics, yeah, definitely. Or
Okay.
electrical products, yes, definitely. Highly applicable
Okay.
in general.
Okay. And so you sort of 11 points that we went through. First of all, understanding which quantity you're going to be ordering over the course of your, manufacturing journey over the years. Two, being able to understand if you need production in a high volume or low product mix setup. So, is the manufacturer going to say, well, hang on, you're asking me to produce several different things at the same time. So are they able to do this? Transparency, number 3. So do you want a transparent supply chain? Protection of intellectual property. Of course, this is a very popular subject and question that we often get asked, isn't it? 5, will they be helping with product development and compliance? Once again, I mean, especially with hardware startups, for example, this is perhaps something that they need assistance with. And 6, the capability of the contract manufacturer. And I think for the rest of it, this is where we're talking a lot about capabilities and understanding what are they a good fit, really? Are they able to provide what we need? And you mentioned auditing, but I suppose doing an audit on prospective suppliers, whether it's a contract manufacturer, ODM or OEM or whatever, this is where you're going to find this out. So you're going to understand their, QC capability, how well they're able to, create the test jigs and put those into action. And then you also talked about liability. So this is more on a contractual basis, right? So we're talking about manufacturing agreements, which is covering liability, but also protecting IP, which we mentioned as well, and payment terms and delivery terms. So definitely on the contractual side. So the reason I go through all of these is because I'm going to leave some links in the show notes to the various different resources that we've created over the years that cover these different things. So, I mean, for example, when we talk about manufacturing agreements, if you're thinking, well, a manufacturing agreement, what's going to be appropriate for a new contract manufacturer in China? Well, we've got a link just for that. So definitely check out the show notes. And if you have got any questions about finding the right contract manufacturer as well, you know what to do. You can contact us and at sofeast.com, and we'll be happy to have a discussion about that and provide some advice, won't we, Renaud?
Right. Yeah, of course. Yes.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks for taking us back through that process. Hopefully everybody's got a much better idea of what it takes to find the right contract manufacturer now. And good to have you back, Renaud.
Thanks. All right. Well, thanks, Adrian. That was a good one.
Thanks again for listening to this podcast brought to you by the Sofeast Group. We're on a mission to provide you with everything you need to manufacture effectively in Asia, including inspections, auditing, new product development support, contract manufacturing, 3PL warehousing and fulfillment, and much, much more across Asia's key manufacturing areas. Visit us at sofeast.com, that's SOFEAST.com, to learn more and get help. If you've enjoyed the podcast today, please do rate, review and share, because it will really help others discover us too.